Why do Americans go to school by bus? Why don't they just walk or bike to the school? America is a spread-out country that was built for cars. In many places, children live too far from the school they attend to walk or even bike there safely. Non-Americans don't get how big the US is. My mother grew up in a rural county. There was one high school in her county. It was 19 miles from her home. I grew up in the suburbs of a medium-sized city. My high school was nearly 5 miles away from my house. Every foot or bike route to that high school required at least a couple miles of travel along a 6-lane divided highway with no sidewalks. During rush hour, children who live within a mile or so of their school typically do walk or bike to school or are dropped off by their parents. However, outside of densely populated cities or the neighborhoods in the suburbs where the schools are located, most American children don't live close enough to their school for that to be safe or practical. There is a saying: Europeans think 100 miles is a long way, and Americans think 100 years is a long time. For real. Born and raised in London, and traveling like 20 miles feels like a real journey. I first noticed this culture difference with Tinder. Most people around here set their Tinder radius to like 5 to 10 miles. Whereas from what I've seen, Americans are willing to travel several dozens of miles for Tinder dates. That is unfathomable to me. 1. School buses are not exclusively an American thing. I'm from a European country and school buses are a thing here too, as well as in the neighboring countries. 2. Not everyone takes the bus to school. Usually it's just kids who live far away from school. Country big. Europe is bigger. I get the point though. Europe not country. Do you not know how big the US is? Distances. Perceived to be safer traffic. Lack of bike lanes. Weather. And the responsibility trade-off from parent to driver makes a lot of parents feel reassured. We aren't even allowed to have kids get on and off the bus unsupervised until they are like 9 years old now. The bus will keep driving if no one is out to meet them. It's all really bubble wrapped now. It's probably a liability issue for the bus company if anything happens to a child at a bus stop. The buses are local government run, but you are probably right that it's fear of liability. Distances. According to Google, if I would have walked to school when I was in high school, it would have taken me 1 hour and 50 minutes to get there. Driving would take 10 minutes. There were no sidewalks from my house to the school, and biking was very dangerous due to the hilly nature and curvy roads. In addition to what's been said so far: weather, extreme heat and cold, rain and snow. I had to walk to school even though it was -20 Celsius and snow up to my knees. Uphill both ways. Do I sound like I'm joking? Where I live there are normally pretty cold during winter time and people just have had to get used to it. Honestly. Yeah. That is a very common joke among older people in the US. It's also fairly common here in the US for poor families not to be able to afford coats and boots for their children. Making them walk to school in that kind of weather underdressed is likely to cause frostbite and hypothermia. Sounds like instead of buses, these people need clothes. Not to say that we shouldn't make sure people have warm clothes, but that only negates one issue. Because walking or biking to school for many kids would take 1 to 2 or more hours. I live in the UK and a solid half of people get the bus to school. Many reasons. Television might lead you to believe otherwise. But sometimes it rains in America. Also, when I was in elementary school, I was 7 miles away from my school. But why just don't use an umbrella? Umbrellas only protect you from water. Not very useful protecting you from wind and lightning. I'm starting to feel that I had a rough childhood then. Haha. Some kids do walk or bike. But most live too far away from school to do so. Mostly because American is big. It may be 20 miles between a student's house and the school. Or because American infrastructure is designed for cars. Students may have to cross major highways. Or travel through areas that are unsafe. I lived 15-minute drive from school. If I biked, that'd be an hour at best. If I walked, 3 hours. One way. In some big cities populations over 500,000, you're likely to have most students within a mile radius of the school because they have dozens of schools in the city. But still, people outside city limits or parents wanting to send their kid cross town to the better school have need for busing. Imagine living in central Berlin and going to school in Potsdam. That's a 6-hour walk. America is a big country and there aren't schools everywhere. Schools are often miles from one's home. In high school, my bus stop was almost a mile from my house. My schools were always at least 5 miles from my house growing up. Also, many roads are not very bike/walk friendly. I definitely would have been risking it by biking to any of my schools. 3 miles on a bike in the city for a 7-year-old is dangerous. Do non-Americans really let their kids ride bikes in rush hour traffic? Rarely people live over 2 miles away from their school here. When I started my school as a 6-year-old, I had to walk only a mile. Biking to school is allowed when you turn 8 years. That's interesting. I don't ever recall an age limit on biking to school here in America. Many schools are also big here, so while I was able to walk to school when I was young, many others at that same school lived way too far away to even think of such a thing. A walk to my high school took 45 to 60 minutes. School started at 7:20 a.m. So I'd need to get up even earlier. Around 5 to 5:30 am or even earlier to get there on time. While there was a mad rush of traffic and it's totally dark. They do in cities where the schools are closer to their home. I walked to school every day as a kid. According to Google Maps, it would take an adult an hour to walk or 20 minutes to bike, but elementary school kids will take probably at least twice that. Plus, many of the roads are busy without sidewalks. My dude. The closest school to me was 15 to 20 minutes by car on a good day. I lived in the suburbs too. Trying to walk that far would be obscene. Most people in America do not live very close to a school at all undefined. A poor neighboring county of mine has one high school. Some kids live 20 miles or almost 30 kilometers from said school and have no other means of transportation. Parents work or the bus is the most convenient. They have to get on the bus more than an hour prior to school due to the route. You would have 14-year-olds walk or bike 20 miles. Sometime in freezing weather over rural roads to school. Also, the main roads into town are heavily trafficked by log trucks going to the local paper mill. My kids live about 10 miles 16 kilometers from school. This is the average distance for most of the kids. Also, most schools in our area discourage walking and biking for safety reasons. There are 3 reasons we use buses. 1. Most people live too far away from a school to walk or bike. Personally, I lived 9 miles away from my high school. With my average walking speed, that's a 3-hour walk in the morning. Meaning I'd have had to leave the house around 4 to 5 a.m. That's before the rain, which made it impossible to ride bikes on the dirt roads. Bundling up for sub-freezing temps. Carrying 3 to 4 textbooks which also wouldn't survive the rain. And enough water to make it to school. Not only that, but it required following an unlit highway lousy with morning drivers and the occasional drunks in the dark. 2. It's safer to ride the bus. Child abductions still happen. But waiting at a bus stop with other kids works wonders to prevent them. Even if just one parent waits at the bus stop, they help protect all of the kids there. It also lessens traffic loads on public streets, lessening the likelihoods of accidents during the mornings and afternoons. 3. Americans aren't in a good place financially. Most households aren't able to afford a second car to let a non-working or later working second parent drive their kids to school and pick them up. I knew kids who would get dropped off at school then ride the bus home because their parents worked later like that. Some would also be the inverse where they ride the bus in and get picked up after school. My household was one parent and 4 children at 3 different schools because of age, and my dad could never have dropped us off at school. And if we had to stay late or miss the bus home, it'd be a couple hours till he was able to pick us up.